So here's the deal with the new iPad. Everything about this iPad is almost exactly the same as last year's iPad. It has the same very good screen, but it isn't laminated, which means there's a tiny little air gap from the glass to the screen. Unless you're really a pixel pedant, it's not going to bother you. It has the same Touch ID software. It's got, cameras. It does not have the smart connector for attaching a keyboard. It's basically the same iPad that you know and love. Okay, so what's actually new? Well, only two things. One is that it has a new processor, the A10, so it's slightly faster. And two, it supports this, the $99 Apple Pencil. And honestly, that's it. I said last year that if you need a new iPad, you should get a new iPad and you should get this iPad because it's an iPad. And that same advice basically holds. If your iPad is old and busted and slow or whatever, go ahead and get this new iPad. And if it's not, don't. Stick with what you got. So this year, the real question isn't, is this iPad any good? Because of course it's good. It's an iPad. No, the real question is, should you spend twice as much to get this thing, the iPad Pro? Well, let's look at the differences between these two iPads and see if it's worth it. So the first thing you'll notice is that the iPad Pro has a bigger screen. It's 10.5 inches versus 9.7. But the iPad Pro also has a nicer screen. It has a higher refresh rate. Apple calls it ProMotion. And you can really see it when you scroll really fast. But I don't know, you're not going to notice it most of the time, I don't think. The iPad Pro also has a wider color gamut, and it also has this thing called True Tone where it adjusts the color temperature of the screen to the room. Sure, that's great. I don't know how important it is to most people. Other iPad Pro differences, it has 4 speakers instead of just 2, so you can hear it in stereo no matter how you're holding it. It has a smart connector so that you can attach a smart keyboard to it. The iPad Pro also has better cameras, and it also has a faster Touch ID sensor. Fine. But to me, the biggest difference is that the iPad Pro has 4 gigs of RAM, and the regular old iPad has 2 gigs of RAM. And you wouldn't think that matters, but it does, because if you have 2 apps open in split screen and you bring a third in slide over, on the iPad Pro you can still use the apps in the background. But on the regular iPad, if you bring up a third app, the apps in the background freeze, and you have to dismiss this top app before you can go back to what you were doing. If I'm honest, I think the only way to justify the extra price of the iPad Pro is if you really know for sure you're going to use it for full-on computer things. If you're going to be editing movies and editing photos and using it as your main computer. If you just want to do tablet stuff, if you want to watch Netflix and read books and browse the web and play games, then the regular old iPad is going to be way better for the vast majority of people.